staying with this thread for a minute, Mike's question ties in well, which is, how do you, or we all, build our relationships with others that we need to build relationships with, whether that's colleague or family or chosen family or community, whatever, but who don't have this sense of a need or will to change, to get conscious. How do you balance the persistence and knowing that that's important and your own personal purpose of it with letting go and allowing those people to proceed on their journey? It's a brilliant question, Mike.
It is, and it's another systemic question, right? Because meaning that it has multiple parts that come into it. The first response I have, and I don't know that this is a fully complete answer, but the first response I have is to, what I wrote down is, show up as yourself, right? So I cannot perceive the kinds of changes we're talking about happening if somebody says, well, you go first. I'm actually not going to show up unless you show up. And again, I want to acknowledge that showing up as yourself is not only healthier for you, but is actually can be unsafe. And so, because that's why we learn not to show up as ourselves, right? We internalize certain kinds of ways in which it's unsafe. So I'm speaking from a point in which I have a lot of status power. So if there is a situation in which what I would be curious about is, are there situations in which you have status power where you are relatively safe and yet you still choose not to show up as yourself? That's a really curious position, because that's probably a learned behavior. And then in that moment, someone has to go first. Someone has to say, you're sitting down at a holiday dinner table and crazy Uncle Joe starts saying crazy Uncle Joe stuff again. And you may feel like you're 5 years old, but you're not. There's discernment. And then you say, Uncle Joe, that thing you just said, that's not acceptable. That hurt me. Or I'm not going to take that anymore. And I know it's scary. I know it's edgy. And I'm not suggesting that in all circumstances it is in fact safe. But in all circumstances, it may not be as dangerous as your 5-year-old thinks. And that part of that journey into adulthood is inculcating the power of discernment. There's an old story of a man who spends his entire night awake in a room, convinced the coil in the corner of the room is a snake, only to discover in the morning that it's a rope. Now that behavior kept that man safe, but anxious. Because he didn't turn on the light of discernment.